See that $12 million luxury resort behind me? The one gleaming with marble fountains, valets running around, and champagne brunches every Sunday? Yeah, that's sitting right where my grandfather's dairy farm used to be, the prison, and I'm about to tell you how I made that happen. But before we get there, tell me, what would you do if someone tried to take your family's land? Drop it in the comments, because I want this story to reach every corner of the world. Let's rewind to where it all began. My grandfather, Earl Morrison, bought our 127-acre spread in East Tennessee back in 1952. He started with nothing but a handshake loan and a promise to pay in milk money. Over decades, he built it into one of the finest dairy farms in the region. 3 barns, a clear creek running through the property, and enough green pasture to keep 40 head of cattle happy year-round. To Earl, that land wasn't just property, it was legacy. Every fence post, every nail, every sunrise over the pasture was a testament to what a man could build with his hands. He'd always tell me, "Jake, you don't measure a man by what he owns. You measure him by what he leaves behind." When Earl passed away in 2019, he left me the land, and $89,000 in medical debt. I was 34, working construction, not exactly prepared to run a dairy farm, but I swore I'd keep it alive. Then came 2020, and the beginning of the end. Developers broke ground next door, carving up old tobacco fields to build Willowbrook Estates, rows of $600,000 McMansions rising up where corn once grew. And before a single family even moved in, an HOA had already formed, led by none other than attorney Patricia Whitmore. At first, I ignored the commotion. I was too busy keeping the lights on and paying off hospital bills. But one morning, I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel drive. Out steps Patricia, cream-colored pantsuit, manicured smile, and the kind of perfume that costs more than my mortgage. "Good morning," she says in that syrupy southern drawl. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. We need to talk about your problem." Apparently, my rooster crowing at dawn violated their community noise standards. My barn was an eyesore. My cows, producing odors that diminished property values. She stood there reading off her clipboard like she was passing judgment. Then she hit me with it, a $500 a month mitigation fee for inconveniencing my neighbors. I asked what would happen if I didn't pay. She gave me that cold lawyer's smile. "Then we'll pursue other legal remedies," she said. "I'm sure you'd prefer this handled reasonably, rather than expensively." As she strutted back to her white BMW, my dog Rex barked so loud the windows rattled. Patricia flinched, her perfect smile cracking. That's when I knew. This wasn't about rules, it was about power, and she'd just declared war. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from the EPA, an anonymous complaint about groundwater contamination from my cattle. But the technical jargon in that report, nitrogen runoff, bacterial thresholds, that wasn't written by a random neighbor. That was lawyer talk. When the EPA inspector showed up, I cooperated fully. He took soil, water, and air samples. 3 weeks later, I got the results. Everything was clean, but I still owed $3,200 in inspection fees. Then came the newspaper headline. "Local farm under investigation. Not cleared of wrongdoing. Just under investigation. My reputation? Gone overnight." That's when I went digging, literally, through county records. At the clerk's office, under stacks of dusty paperwork, I found it. Every legal document tied to Willowbrook Estates had been handled by Whitmore and Associates. Patricia had written the very HOA laws she was now using to attack me. Armed with proof, I walked into her next HOA meeting. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, all that suburban opulence. The moment I entered, heads turned like I'd tracked mud into a cathedral. Patricia's fake smile appeared instantly. "Mr. Morrison," she said sweetly, "so glad you could join us." I raised my stack of documents. "Turns out your law firm created this HOA. That's a bit of a conflict of interest, isn't it? Especially since you're using your own rules to extort me." Silence. Her smile vanished. Whispers rippled through the room. "And funny thing," I added, "those EPA complaints use terminology that only a lawyer would know. Know anything about that?" Her face flushed crimson. The meeting ended fast after that, but from the way her eyes flicked when I mentioned county planning, I knew she was hiding something bigger. The harassment escalated. 3 surprise health inspections in 2 weeks. Fines for unsanitary conditions that didn't exist. Paperwork fees stacking up. Then neighbors, clearly coached, began filing their own complaints. Noise, smells, property lines. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Then, in my grandfather's attic, buried under 70 years of receipts and tax forms. I found something extraordinary: the original 1952 property survey. The faded map showed my land extended 40 feet beyond the current fence line, right into the HOA's precious community playground. I checked and rechecked. The old iron boundary markers were still there, half buried in the oaks. No mistake. That swing set was sitting on my soil. So I did what any modern man would do. I posted the evidence on the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group. Caption: interesting discovery about property lines. Might want to recheck your HOA boundaries. Within hours, the post blew up. Dozens of comments, neighbors panicking. Patricia's response? All caps fury. This is harassment. I'm consulting my attorney. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy showed up. Mr. Morrison, he said awkwardly. Ms. Whitmore filed for a restraining order. Says you've been threatening the community. Threatening? For posting a map? At the hearing, Patricia came armed with lawyers in designer suits. I came with truth, but the judge, clearly tired of neighborhood feuds, sided with her. Temporary restraining order granted. No contact with HOA members, no more posts, or I'd face arrest. As we left the courtroom, Patricia leaned close. You should have taken the easy way, she whispered. Now it's going to cost you everything. And she meant it. Within a week, she filed a motion to force sale of my property, claiming my farm was a public nuisance. Then she brought in a Nashville firm, Barnes, Mitchell & Cross, big-shot attorneys who specialized in land acquisitions. My small-town lawyer, Jimmy Fitzgerald, did his best. Jake, he said one morning over coffee, scanning the documents, they're moving for an emergency hearing in 30 days. If this goes through, they'll auction your farm. 70 years of family history, gone in a month. That night I went back to the attic again. Digging through Earl's old papers, I found letters from 1995. They were from Tennessee Natural Gas Exploration Company. The company had wanted to lease our mineral rights. Apparently, there were shale gas reserves under our land. The offer? $50,000 upfront and royalties. Earl's handwritten reply stopped me cold. Thank you for your offer, but this land is for growing, not drilling. Those letters mentioned that new drilling methods had made the gas deposits valuable, and that was in 1995. I spent 3 days researching modern energy prices and drilling tech. What I found stunned me. Natural gas was worth triple what it had been back then. Horizontal drilling could now access deposits that were once unreachable. Our 127 acres weren't just farmland, they were sitting on a potential fortune. I started calling energy companies. Within hours, my phone was lighting up with responses. Tennessee Energy Partners wanted to send a geologist out immediately. Appalachian Gas and Oil wanted to meet as soon as possible. And that's when it hit me. Patricia wasn't after my cows, or my roosters, or my barn. She was after what was underneath them. The land she tried to steal wasn't for housing expansion. It was for gas extraction. The resort they'd eventually build? That was just the cover story. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated a man raised on hard work and family legacy. The moment those gas company calls started coming in, everything about the past 2 years suddenly made sense. Patricia hadn't just wanted me off that land, she needed me off it. And fast. Because buried beneath my grandfather's soil wasn't just history. It was money. A fortune in natural gas. But if Patricia thought she was the only one who knew about it, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. 2 mornings later, a man named Dr. Stephen Harlan pulled into my driveway in a silver Ford F-150 with Tennessee Energy Partners stenciled on the side. He wasn't some slick executive, just a geologist with a sharp mind and a dirt-under-the-nails kind of attitude I could respect. He shook my hand, like a man who meant it. You're sitting on something interesting here, Mr. Morrison. Mind if I take a few core samples? Long as you don't bring a lawyer, I said. He laughed, pulling on work gloves. Just science today, son. The lawyers come later. By dusk, he'd pulled 3 core samples from my south pasture and run them through a portable spectrometer. I stood beside him, watching him stare at that little blinking screen like it was Christmas morning. Well, he finally said, taking off his hat, your granddad's land sits right over the New Market Shale Formation. Good depth, solid pressure readings. If our tests are right, you're looking at a potential yield of 15 to 20 million cubic feet of recoverable gas. That's not just good, Mr. Morrison. That's life-changing. My knees nearly gave out. I thought of Earl, of all the years he'd spent milking cows in the rain, and how he'd refused to sell because he believed land meant something deeper than profit. Turns out, his stubbornness might have saved the family fortune without ever knowing it. Dr. Harlan promised to send an official report within the week, and that report would become my weapon. 3 days later, I drove to my lawyer's office with a new fire in my chest. Jimmy was halfway through his coffee when I dropped the folder on his desk. He flipped through the papers, eyes widening. "Jake, this changes everything." "Yeah," I said. "And now I want to change her everything." Jimmy nodded slowly, already thinking ahead. "We'll need to get this certified, filed with the county, and recorded with the Mineral Rights Office. If the HOA's trying to force a sale, we argue that they're doing it under false pretenses, attempting to seize land they know contains valuable mineral reserves. That's wire fraud, real estate fraud, and potentially racketeering." I grinned. "You think she'll still be smiling after that?" He grinned back. "She'll be smiling through prison glass if we do this right." But Patricia wasn't sitting idle. The same day Jimmy filed the motion to dismiss the nuisance claim, I received another certified letter, this one from Barnes, Mitchell, and Cross. They were requesting a temporary injunction against any unauthorized geological activity on my land. Basically, she was trying to stop me from drilling or even testing. That was her tell. She knew about the gas, or at least suspected it. I called Jimmy. "She's trying to shut down the testing." He sighed. "She's getting desperate." "That's good. Desperate people make mistakes." And sure enough, she did. 2 days later, I got a late-night call from Mary Beth, the elderly neighbor who'd warned me months before. Her voice was shaky, but urgent. "Jake, you didn't hear this from me," she whispered. "But I was at the county clerk's office today. Patricia's been meeting with a man from East Valley Development Group. They're filing preliminary zoning requests to reclassify your farm as commercial property." I felt my blood run cold. That was it, the final move. Once the zoning changed, the HOA could legally push an eminent domain claim through the county board, buy my land for pennies, and flip it for millions once the gas rights surfaced. But they didn't count on one thing: me fighting back with the same weapon they'd used, paperwork. Jimmy and I spent the next 2 weeks assembling what he called the hammer. Every complaint, inspection, letter, photo, and survey. Every single piece of evidence that showed a pattern of harassment and fraud. But the pièce de résistance was Dr. Harlan's official geological report. It confirmed 18.4 million cubic feet of recoverable gas under my property, with an estimated market value north of $14.7 million. Jimmy filed a countersuit that Friday. Morrison versus Whitmore, Willowbrook Estates HOA, and East Valley Development Group. The allegations? Fraud, conspiracy to commit unlawful land seizure, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Damages sought, $10 million. I didn't want money. I wanted justice. But in the legal world, dollar signs make judges listen. Patricia's reaction was nuclear. She held a press conference outside her HOA building, calling me a dangerous agitator and a disgruntled landowner fabricating claims for financial gain. I just smiled for the cameras and said one line: "Everything I've said is in writing, and everything she's done is, too." The discovery phase of the lawsuit was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Emails surfaced between Patricia and a senior partner at East Valley Development. In one, she wrote, "We need him out before the mineral survey is public. Once it's rezoned, we can transfer the rights through the HOA's redevelopment clause." That single line, "once it's rezoned," was all it took. The DA's office got involved. Then the FBI. Turns out, Patricia and her partners had been running similar land flip schemes in 2 other counties. Use HOA bylaws to drive out legacy owners, rezone the land, and sell the mineral or water rights to private firms. When the feds came knocking, her allies scattered like roaches. Barnes, Mitchell, and Cross dropped her as a client overnight. Her law license was suspended. And within weeks, the Queen of Willowbrook Estates was indicted on 5 counts of fraud and 1 of conspiracy. When the case hit trial, I showed up in the same courtroom where she'd once smirked at me over that restraining order. This time, she was the one in handcuffs. I'll never forget the look she gave me when the verdict came down. Guilty on all counts. 3 years federal time, with restitution to be paid directly to the Morrison estate. After the sentencing, I drove back to the farm and stood by the old barn Earl had built with his bare hands. The sun was setting, painting the fields in gold. For the first time in years, it was quiet. No legal threats, no inspectors, no HOA letters. Just peace. I could almost hear Earl's voice in the breeze. "Never let a thief take what you built. Jake, not while you can still stand. The resort behind the property went up not long after, ironically, built on land that once belonged to the same HOA that tried to destroy me. They had to buy it legally this time, from Meow, and I charged them every cent it was worth. The drilling rights? I leased those to Tennessee Energy Partners. The royalties will keep the Morrison name on this land for generations. And me? I still work construction. But now I build on my terms. Sometimes people drive past and see the luxury resort glimmering on the horizon and ask if I'm bitter. I just smile. Because every brick of that resort sits on soil my grandfather once walked. And every dollar it makes reminds me that justice, though slow, eventually finds its way home. Months after Patricia went to prison, Mary Beth stopped by the farm with a basket of biscuits and a newspaper clipping. The headline read, HOA President Convicted in Multi-Million-Dollar Land Fraud Scheme. She handed it to me with a wink. Told you not to let that woman destroy what your grandfather built. I framed the article and hung it in the barn, right next to Earl's old hammer. That hammer still has his initials carved into the handle. EM 1953. Every time I pick it up, I'm reminded that this land, this fight, this victory, it all started with one man's promise to protect what he loved. So when I look at that $12 million resort gleaming behind my fields, I don't see luxury. I see a monument to hard work, to legacy, and to the truth that no matter how powerful your enemies seem, integrity still wins in the end. And if Patricia ever watches this from her cell, I hope she understands one thing. You can't steal what's rooted in blood and built on honor. Because around here, the land remembers who it belongs to. The months following Patricia's conviction were a blur. Reporters started showing up at the farm gate. Local ones at first, then regional, then national. CNN, Fox, even Al Jazeera sent vans to cover what they called the rancher who beat the HOA machine. They framed me like some folk hero, a modern David standing up to a corrupt Goliath. I wasn't used to the attention. I'd spent most of my life fixing fences, not giving interviews. But when I saw how many people out there were facing the same kind of quiet tyranny I had, neighbors bullied by their own communities, threatened with foreclosure, silenced by legal letters, I realized I couldn't stay quiet anymore. So when the Tennessee Energy Partners offered me a signing bonus to appear in a community partnership campaign, I said yes, but on one condition. They had to sponsor a nonprofit legal fund site for homeowners wrongfully targeted by their HOAs. They agreed without hesitation. That's how the Earl Morrison Foundation for Property Rights was born. We started small. Just me, Jimmy, and a retired paralegal named Doris who could quote zoning ordinances like scripture. Within 3 months, we had 50 active cases across the country. One of them was in Arizona. A single mother named Camilla, whose HOA fined her $300 a day for unapproved drought-resistant landscaping. She'd planted succulents to save water during a drought, and they wanted her to replace them with grass. We took her case pro bono. 2 months later, the court ruled in her favor. The HOA not only dropped the fines, they had to pay her attorney fees. That victory made headlines, and suddenly, donations started pouring in. Meanwhile, the gas project on my land started to take shape. Tennessee Energy built 2 small rigs near the south pasture. Compact, quiet, designed for minimal disruption. They installed underground pipelines, new fencing, and safety systems that I insisted on overseeing personally. Every morning, I'd walk out with a mug of coffee, watching the steam rise over the rigs. What struck me most wasn't the noise or machinery. It was the sense of purpose. The land that nearly got stolen from me was now providing jobs, energy, and stability for families across the region. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Dr. Harlan stopped by. He handed me a folder. "Production's steady," he said. "You're sitting on more than we thought, about 30 million cubic feet of usable gas. If we manage it right, this land could sustain operations for 20 years. I whistled low. "That's a long time for something everyone thought was worthless." He smiled. "Funny thing about value, Jake. Sometimes the world just needs the right eyes to see it." But the story wasn't over. About 6 months after the foundation launched, I got a letter from a federal investigator, Agent Sandra Collins. She wanted to meet to discuss related patterns of activity in other states. When she arrived, she wasn't wearing the stereotypical dark suit, just jeans, boots, and a leather jacket, the kind of agent who understood country roads. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd signed away half my sanity fighting Patricia's lawsuits. She flipped open a binder thick with files. "Mr. Morrison, your HOA wasn't the only one pulling these tricks. We've tracked similar fraudulent land flips tied to at least 5 different companies. East Valley among them. Same pattern: harassment, forced buyouts, rezoning, mineral extraction." I leaned back. "You're saying it's a network?" "Exactly. And your case cracked it open." She paused, lowering her voice. "There's something else. These companies aren't just after land. They're after energy patents, renewable ones. We found correspondence between East Valley executives and tech inventors who mysteriously went bankrupt right before signing over intellectual property rights." That hit me like a freight train. "You think Patricia knew?" "Oh, she knew. She just didn't realize she was a pawn in something bigger." Agent Collins asked if I'd be willing to testify in a federal hearing about how the scheme unfolded from my perspective. I agreed on the spot. That hearing took place in Washington, D.C. I'd never been to the Capitol before. Walking those marble halls felt surreal, like I didn't belong among the suits and the echoes of power. But when I stood before that congressional committee, I spoke from the same place that had carried me through every storm: honesty. I told them how an HOA weaponized bureaucracy to steal my land, how lawyers used zoning loopholes to disguise corporate theft, and how the system favored those with money and paperwork over those with roots and sweat. The room went silent when I finished. One congressman leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, if you could change one thing about the system, what would it be?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Make honesty worth more than signatures. Make it so a man doesn't have to lose everything before the truth counts." That quote ended up plastered on headlines, TikToks, and even a documentary trailer called The Land Remembers. The foundation's website crashed from the surge of traffic the next day. The ripple effect was unstoppable. Within a year, states like Texas, Arizona, and Georgia began reviewing HOA powers, especially those allowing property seizures. A Tennessee senator introduced the fee-meaned Homeowner Fair Practices Act, nicknamed the Morrison Bill. It aimed to protect private landowners from forced sales and fraudulent rezoning. The bill passed in Tennessee by an overwhelming margin. When the governor invited me to the signing ceremony, I brought Earl's hammer. I placed it on the desk beside the pen. He laughed. "You plan to fix the system, or just hit it with that thing?" "Maybe both," I said. But with attention came enemies. One night I got a call from Jimmy. His voice was low and tense. "Jake, you need to see something." He sent me a link, an anonymous blog post accusing me of insider trading, claiming I'd used privileged information from the gas deal to buy stock in Tennessee Energy before the public announcement. Completely false, but convincing enough to stir rumors. By morning, the story had spread to Twitter. Trolls called me a hypocrite. Reporters demanded statements. Jimmy said, "It's an old trick. Smear the whistleblower." Agent Collins confirmed it. "The same people your testimony hurt are trying to discredit you. But don't worry. We're tracking them." Still, the damage stung. For the first time since Patricia's downfall, I felt the weight of the fight pressing on me again. I wasn't just defending my name anymore. I was defending the truth itself. A week later, I drove out to the ridge where Earl used to take me hunting. I hadn't been up there in years. The view stretched for miles. Fields, rigs, barns, the distant glint of the resort lights. I thought about everything that had happened. The loss, the rage, the redemption. And I realized something. Every storm I'd weathered had only cleared the path for others to follow. If they wanted to smear me, fine. But they couldn't bury what had already taken root. When I came back down that ridge, I called Jimmy and said, "We're expanding. No more just defending people. We're going after the system that lets this corruption exist." We rebranded the foundation as the Morrison Project. And with new funding from honest energy companies and citizen donors, we built a nationwide network of volunteer lawyers, surveyors, and auditors. We didn't just fight HOAs anymore. We targeted fraudulent development boards, corrupt zoning commissions, and shell corporations used to steal rural land. Our slogan became simple: land is legacy. And that message caught fire. By the time the second anniversary of Patricia's sentencing rolled around, I was standing on a stage in Nashville, speaking at a conference for landowners' rights. There were over 2,000 people in the audience: farmers, veterans, small-town mayors, even students studying environmental law. I looked out over that crowd and said, they thought this fight was about one farm, but it's about all of us. Because when someone steals your land, they're not just taking dirt. They're taking history. They're erasing your family's footprint, and that's one thing I'll never let happen again. The standing ovation lasted almost a full minute. Later that night, after the cameras packed up and the lights dimmed, Dr. Harlan found me backstage. He handed me a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "Preliminary data from a test well we drilled 20 miles east. Same shale layer, same composition. We think your land might be part of a much larger deposit stretching across the valley." I blinked. "You're saying there's more?" He nodded. "A lot more. But this time, let's make sure it stays in the right hands." I opened the envelope and stared at the map inside. Red lines tracing a formation that could change everything for our region. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into my jacket. "Let's do it right this time," I said. "Earl's way." Back home, I stood once again beside that old barn. The framed newspaper still hung on the wall. The hammer still rested on its hook. The wind rustled through the fields, carrying the faint hum of drilling rigs and crickets. I looked toward the horizon, where land, law, and legacy had collided, and felt something deeper than victory. It was continuity. This fight had started with a rancher defending his inheritance, but it had become something far bigger. A movement reminding America that justice doesn't start in marble halls. It starts on dirt roads, in small kitchens, on porches where people refuse to give up. And as long as I'm breathing, that fight won't stop.